It's Monday, and that so happens to be the day that I like to talk about monsters. I'm Jeff Arbuckle, and this is another episode of Monster Mondays presented to you by Film Seizure. You can catch new episodes of Film Seizure with myself and Jason Oliver on Wednesdays, but Mondays, they're for me to talk about monster movies. Now, we've survived the slimy, bitey invasion of electro-charged worms from Squirm, but can we survive the bug? This week's feature is the final writing and producing credit for William Castle. Castle mostly made a name for himself by creating true spectacle experiences in the late 50s through the 60s. You see, when he was 13, he saw Bela Lugosi perform Dracula on stage and just absolutely fell in love with the horror genre. He was nothing short of a showman. A lot of his movies would include some sort of audience participation gimmick or featured additional thrills. For example, The Tingler had a moment in which you might feel your chair begin to vibrate and you had to scream as loudly as you could to destroy the creature attacking you. So it did play along with what the Tingler creature was in the movie and how it affected your fear centers in your brain and so forth. For another one of his films, 13 Ghosts, Castle used a gimmick called Illusiono, which allowed the audience members to opt to wear a special pair of glasses, and that's probably not too much unlike the paper glasses with specific lenses that you used for old 3D features. But you could wear these glasses to actually see the ghost. Now, those a little more spooked by that idea ultimately could opt out as well. Castle's most known movie is probably The House on Haunted Hill. That was about an eccentric millionaire messing about with dinner guests he's invited to his home and locked inside. I think he had gimmicks in some of the showings of that as well, with various actors running about or skeletons on strings and so forth. But I'm not exactly sure which came first. The popular midnight spook shows designed for teens and young adults to go to for a cheap thrill, or the various gimmicks that Castle used, but you can't say there isn't some sense of familial bond between those two ideas. Now, I do like to think about what movies were like back then as well. On one hand, you have Castle doing his showman gimmicks, and on the other, you have the filmmaker Bert I. Gordon, who liked having giant monsters. After all, his initials literally spelled big, Bert I. Gordon, B-I-G. So both of these guys worked into the 70s in genre films. In fact, Gordon is actually still alive today, a fact I did not know until I looked it up in preparation for this episode. For sure, we will get to some of Gordon's giant monsters down the way. So let's talk about 1975's Bug. This movie, in a lot of ways, like last week's Squirm, starts with a generally mundane, everyday sort of thing. In Squirm, it was a big thunderstorm. Now, while as big of a thunderstorm that started Squirm out is not exactly uncommon, it's not exactly common either. In Bug, it's a church service, so it's a good old-fashioned fire and brimstone type stuff too, as this church seems to be out in the middle of nowhere and full of a bunch of God-fearing folks. In the middle of the sermon, a huge earthquake occurs, creating a bunch of damage to the church and to the various homes in the surrounding area. Now, nearby, a chasm has opened up from the earthquake, and a bunch of smooth black rocks appear to be littering the ground. And when a member of the townsfolk is going to check out some of the damage with his son, their truck, as it's driving down the street, goes from overheating to flooding to exploding, killing the old man and his son. And that's when we learn that the stones around where the chasm was opened up is some sort of fairly large roach. Almost like a scarab, by the way it looks. Before long, we begin to see wherever the bugs go, there's usually a great deal of smoke and fire. These bugs start using this ability to ignite to cause all sorts of problems. A guy picks one up only for it to burn him. Others are collecting around him to try to inflict more pain. The same guy watches a cat get attacked by a bunch of the bugs and ultimately burned to death and somewhat exploded. I mean, damn, it's bad enough to kill the kitty with excruciating burns, but to then cause him to blow up, man, I mean, that's cold. The guy also sees the bugs start to burn up little brushes and start little brush fires around on his land as well. After that, we meet biology professor James Parmenter. He's our lead character. He seems particularly well versed in animal behavior. The guy from the night before, named Gerald, brings him one of the bugs to find out what the hell is going on with these creatures. And the professor says there is no insect that can actually create fire. Additionally, he tells Gerald that there's no bug that will just stand still and allow someone to pick it up with the intent to burn the shit out of that guy. So the professor is now pretty interested. They go out to the chasm and the professor collects one of the specimens, and he noticed that it's kind of a strange bug. I mean, aside from the burning and the whatnot, it's heavy. It has a sectional body, but only 6 legs. It's muscular and it doesn't have any eyes. Not only that, but it has these black antennae that can start a fire like rubbing flint together. And then it eats the ashes of whatever it burned. Oh, and it gets better. They are seemingly indestructible. So for a while, it seems like the bugs are mostly interested in climbing into people's cars and starting fires that lead to booms, because we all know that all cars in the movies are made of explosion stuff. What's kind of funny about all this is that there was a mystery about how the bugs were traveling. Their legs were apparently made for running, but they're never seen doing anything but walking. Professor Jim here figures out that they're thumbing rides all over town in cars. The implications of that and the thoughts running through my head about how that looks is honestly phenomenal. Like, I mean, are they just like hopping on like hobos on a train, or are they piling up, putting on a trench coat and a hat and pretending to be a person in order to flag down a car and catch a ride? I mean, somebody please draw me a picture of what that would look like. All right, so in all seriousness, though, the bugs are infesting the town and starting all sorts of trouble as they start messing with cars, lighting buildings on fire, killing pets. They even burn a girl's ear and hair because it was hiding on a telephone receiver, and it got put up to her face when she answered the phone. They're also upping the ante on the menace ever so slightly throughout the movie. Now, Professor Jim figures out that the bugs are from the super dense and much more pressurized deep levels of the earth, possibly closer to the core of the earth. They don't have eyes because they don't need them. Because it is such a high pressure down there, they are stronger and denser. So that explains their weight and their vaguely indestructible nature. Ultimately, the good news is that the much, much lower pressure on the surface of the planet is not conducive to their needs, and they will eventually die because they can't depressurize. Ultimately, Jim's wife is killed when one of the bugs crawls into her hair and lights her on fire. And as she flails around the house, the whole house goes up in flames. And now Jim is even more determined than ever to really kind of figure these creatures out. So he takes another specimen, one of only a few who haven't popped yet from the pressure, which is kind of cool. He figures out that because they can't depressurize on the surface, they have no way to kind of vent that off when they're on the surface, that they ultimately pop and blow up. It's kind of, I mean, yeah, it's kind of cool. For some reason, he's uniquely obsessed with whether or not the firebugs will copulate with a regular household variety of roach. And throughout this grieving process, Jim eventually becomes kind of a crazy hermit, but he is successful in getting a regular roach and a fire roach to reproduce. Much to Jim's delight, the new hybrid bugs attack and kill the fire roach, but the dumbass doesn't properly latch the critter's cage, and some escape, and after discovering that they will only eat as a combined unit and where raw meat is available, they start to like kind of eat him while he's sleeping. He does survive and try to kill them with the pressure tank, but when he harms the ones that constantly escape and that he's thrown into the pressure tank, he sees the others in the normal cage are affected as well. But only the ones in the pressure tank actually end up dying. The bugs ultimately become super intelligent, starting to create patterns to communicate and ultimately gain the ability to fly. And Jim believes he's, at this point, kind of gone too far, but it's also too late. They have reproduced and attacked his dead wife's friend, and they've grown giant and look real scary like. And in a classic creation destroying the creator sort of move, they turn on Jim and attack him, and he ultimately falls into the chasm. And before it closes up, the new form of flying firebugs follow him, and they are trapped inside the ground again. Maybe. To be fair, I was not sure if that was what was happening or not. Okay, since I spent a lot of time talking about the plot of Bug, let's get right to my 3 things I like about this movie. First, I love the idea of underground mutant bug creatures. I mean, just the sound of that, underground mutant bug creature, already has my attention. But much like Squirm, we have something that many people will have a natural aversion to, and they are the primary menace. Sure, Professor Jim creates even worse bugs, but the movie begins and ends with the bugs being the villain. And we don't have a dumb redneck worm farmer becoming a skin suit for worms to menace the girl he's sweet on or nothing like that. It's simple. There's shit underground. We don't know much about it, and now they are here. That leads directly to thing number 2 I like about this movie. They aren't just underground mutant bug creatures. They are gross bug creatures that can light shit on fire. While the movie could have shown a more widespread desolation created by the bugs by blowing up more than just a couple of cars in a single building, the bugs seemingly do things on a much more personal level. They kill a cat. They're attacking people. And attacking characters that we care about because they at least have a little bit of characterization done before the bugs come into their world. But let's think about what they do and how goddamn awful it would be. Twice we saw women attacked by the bugs. One lit the girl's ear on fire. A second lit a lady's hair on fire. This would be a terrible thing to experience. It would be like someone lighting charcoal on fire like they're going to cook up some hamburgers, and then taking one of the coals and resting it upon your ear or in your hair. Okay, shit's going to melt and possibly spark into a fire, right? Yeah, but what do you normally do when you have stuff on you that's burning the shit out of your hair and or ear? Yeah, you try to get that hot stuff off your skin or hair. But something is that something is either latched on or burned onto you. It will take more than a swat to knock it off of you. So that's where I'm going with this. This is a very bothersome and kind of terrifying situation to be in. Lastly, this movie is based on a book and can be pretty much labeled as a science fiction film, or at the very least sci-fi adjacent. It's paced as such too. It's probably why I spent a lot of time talking about the plot. Much like many other pre-Star Wars sci-fi or sci-fi adjacent flicks, you don't get a ton of action. This movie wants to be taken very seriously, and truth be told, it actually becomes very dense in content. It's about the discovery of a new creature that is incredibly harmful to the ecosystem on the surface. It's an accident that brings them out. From there, it becomes more of a science drama movie with Professor Jim trying to find out more about the bugs. By pretty much losing everything to a single one of the bugs, he becomes obsessed and a real weirdo. But it doesn't happen through action. It's a slow descent into madness for Jim. However, when you could almost say that what he discovers about the new breed of fire roaches has to be a figment of his insanity, it turns out that it's so much worse than that. It's an actual nightmare scenario that he accidentally created an intelligent life form. It's a particularly creepy moment when they begin communicating with him through formations of letters and words on the wall. And on top of that, there is some symbolism sprinkled in. It begins with a church sermon that ends with Jim falling into a chasm that is glowing red, kind of like hell. As he is learning about their intelligence growing by leaps and bounds, his dead wife's friend is trying to return a Bible that belonged to his wife. And naturally, there is an element included covering the whole idea of creation rendering the creator no longer useful. Bug absolutely turned out to be a much more interesting movie than I initially wanted to give it credit for, but I didn't expect for it to be as interesting as it was, but also not surprised at all that it took a slower pace like any other 70s sort of sci-fi flick did back then. So that wraps up this week's Monster Mondays. Until next week, I'll see you later, and don't forget to check out new episodes of Film Seizure every Wednesday and a new installment of Monster Mondays each Monday on filmseizure.com. And you can also check out my new post at my website, bmovieenema.com, each and every Friday.